we're joined by today 3 different panelists who want to talk about accessibility needs in the US. So I'm joined by Jason Olson, Leslie Davis, and William Carter. If you've not turned on your camera or your microphone, I'd like to invite you to do that now, and then I will get you all to invite yourselves just in the order that I can see you on my screen. So Jason, if you could kick us off with a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I did the Fulbright in 2016 as a governance and policy and public policy award winner. At the time, I was living in DC, and I went over to Northern Ireland, where I spent 12 months working on my project. And since then, have pretty much remained in the UK since that time, and I am still here to this day. Currently, I'm doing research in conjunction with the Cabinet Office down in London. So it's been a good experience.
Oh. And then, William, you're one of our current Fulbright postgraduate students. Is that right?
Yeah, so I'm doing a human geography PhD at the University of California, Berkeley. I arrived here, August 2020. So I've just gone into my second year of study.
And Leslie, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi. I'm the Assistant Dean for International Programs at Indiana University Law School. I used to be a Fulbright advisor at one of my former positions, and I am a wheelchair user for 15 years, and I travel around the world quite a bit and have plenty of thoughts about how to navigate different countries for people with mobility disabilities.
It's also worth saying that the Law School Indiana is one of our partner awards. They sponsor one of our partner awards, so you're familiar with UK Fulbright as well.
Indeed.
As an institution. So
yes,
thank you all.
We welcome people to our LLM degree program.
Thank you all for joining me today. It's really exciting. We've got a lot of different perspectives for this panel particularly. So I suppose we've heard a little bit, Leslie, you said you've got some thoughts on accessibility around the world. And particularly today, we're talking to a lot of people from the UK who are going to be coming to the US. Do you think there's particular challenges in the US for wheelchair users, and then perhaps broadening that out to looking at other disabilities?
Yeah, so certainly there are challenges. Anyone with a disability knows there are challenges inherent in our existence. But the really great thing about the United States is the Americans with Disabilities Act, which means for this population in particular, that every university you go to, it is a federal mandate that it be accessible, whether regardless of what your disability is. So buildings, classrooms, elevators, sidewalks, getting to particular offices, it should all be accessible. And if it's not, this would be surprising, and there will be a process to remedy that. So William, I don't know if you've noticed the situation on the Berkeley campus, but basically you should be able to enter any building and any classroom if you were using a wheelchair. But that also extends to other accommodations. So if you need large print, or if you need books to be brailled or recorded, this is all provided for under the Americans with Disabilities Act. The biggest complaint that students have is that it can sometimes take a long time. So my number one recommendation is, if you are about to come to the US to study, is alert your host university about the nature of your their disability services office. And every university has one, and every university department has a coordinator for that. But alert them about what your particular needs are, and find out ahead of time what kind of documentation they're going to require in order to put those things in place. There are things that are pretty obvious, like I use a wheelchair. I need to be able to enter buildings. But if it comes to various learning disabilities or, you know, emotional or social emotional disabilities, some that are invisible, let's say, there is often paperwork and documentation required, and you need to know what the requirements are so that you can come with them and receive the services that you are entitled to. But first and foremost, this is absolutely not new territory for American universities. And some universities are better at it than others, but you should have the absolute expectation that your needs according to your disability can be met.
I imagine that's pretty reassuring to hear. Jason or William, do you have anything to add to that as an opening to this discussion, but also perhaps from that perspective as being able to compare it to the UK with some more direct experiences?
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, I mean, I did my master's and other work in the US, of course, and I did find, while, you know, under the Rehabilitation Act and the ADA and stuff, that higher education institutions are supposed to provide for that. It doesn't always mean you're not going to have to push for it. And sometimes you may even have to fight for it a little bit. I know that was definitely the case where I went to college. So I think that actually kind of carried over even when I came to the UK, that I still had to fight for certain what would be called here reasonable adjustments would be called reasonable accommodations in the US. It means pretty much exactly the same thing. It's just different nomenclature that we use over there. But there is more legal protection, I feel, in the US because there's more of a method and a mechanism there. And Leslie could probably talk about this, being an attorney, that there's more legal protection there for you because there's almost a financial punishment that you can bring against people who are not adhering to laws and regulations. And I think that the ADA is much stronger than, say, the Equality Act if you're in the UK, or the DDA, Disability Discrimination Act, if you're in Northern Ireland. So I do think that does give you a little bit more power to push back. But I guess my thing, and I think most of us as disabled people will say this, that that'll be another thing, is you know, you may have to push for things. Don't think it's all going to be roses and sunshine, because sometimes there are still some universities, like Leslie said, that, you know, it's a broad group. So sometimes not everyone's hitting the marks they need to be. But even then, like talking about nomenclature, you know, here it's very much disabled people, whereas there, even other disabled people may be offended if you're saying disabled people. They've really kind of acquiesced to this person first language because, you know, well, the social model wasn't developed there and a whole lot of other things. So it's kind of where it's come from. I'm not sure if that helps, but if there's any other follow-up questions, I'm happy to address that.
I have a few thoughts. So Berkeley is where a lot of the disability rights movement in the US started, with Ed Roberts, mobility user. And it arrives a lot, if I, Leslie may know this better than me, it arrives a lot through like Vietnam vets.
Yep.
And you see that history respected a lot on campus. But I think there's a difficulty within that. So not only are we entering a new wave of disability justice, or several new waves, I think that the history at some points can almost hold us back. So before you go to Berkeley, UC Berkeley, you've got to take courses on its history. And the two things they usually want to tell you about is the free speech movement happened in Berkeley, and they want to kind of really value on the importance of free speech. And they want to speak to you about disability rights. But I've noticed a problem when I come here to ask for, say, some accommodations. So in the US, particularly at Berkeley, they have the accommodation model for disability. And what that basically means, and the theory of it, is this is the educational norm, this is the expectation, and we will accommodate you to that. but the norm stays the same. And the way I want to approach this, or the way I'd like to approach this, is kind of the universal design model, where the norm actually bends and changes around the individual, rather than the individual having to bend and change around the norm itself. And so what I've noticed is many times when I'm trying to speak to my, say, professors or programs about the importance of kind of universal design principles and basically altering the norm of the course itself, I kind of hit into friction. I hit into friction because people are very proud of kind of the accommodation model and 1970s first wave of disability justice. And me coming in and want to change that, I've noticed some kind of friction there. So just to give you kind of an overview of what we're going through now at Berkeley in these waves, I think we have two waves coming at the moment. We have a wave for universal design principles, so UDL, and we have a wave from disabled people of color wanting to be kind of more front and center in the discourse. At Berkeley particularly, and I think Leslie and Jason may agree with you, and newish universities, faculty autonomy is very important, very, very important. Maybe even the kind of first principle of higher education. So at the minute you're noticing a friction between advocates of UDL, universal design, and advocates of faculty autonomy. There's almost been an invisible divide put up, or some kind of conflict between faculty thinking, you can't tell me how to, what to do in your classroom outside of the UDL, and then UDL advocates say, actually, no, I think all of your classes should be accessible. So I noticed one of the main areas of friction at the minute is between faculty saying, you can't tell me what to put in the classroom, and UDL advocates saying, actually, no, I think it should be mandated. So the mandation of universal design learning at the moment at Berkeley, at least, is I think at the forefront of disability, and students I think will notice that maybe increasingly if they keep on coming from the UK to the US.
William, that is a fantastic point, and that is exactly where I see the tension. And there's universal design when it comes to the built environment. There's also universal design for learning. And people can wrap their minds around universal design where it means ramps and elevators and things like that. Because that started with, the pouring their own curb cuts in Berkeley in the 1970s. Nobody's going to disagree with you that somebody should be allowed into the building, unless, of course, it's a historic preservation advocate who says you couldn't possibly make this building accessible. But it's the universal design for learning when a sort of central office on campus says to a professor, I know you've never used PowerPoint before in your life, but you are going to have to make what you speak accessible in the written word. And then suddenly, and here's the part where I get the professor's reluctance. Suddenly the course they've been teaching for 30 years, where they've never used any visual aids or they've never used anything except themselves and maybe a piece of chalk. Suddenly they have to change all that, and here's where the ADA doesn't mandate who's supposed to do what here. It's, well, how am I going to make that happen in the next 3 weeks? Or who can I hire to do that for me? And this is, I see it on my own campus. There's a debate over whose job that is. And so the disabled person, essentially, it's like passing the buck. That is, that's hard to remedy. But the more of us there are, the greater the chance that a professor will have to encounter it for the first time. And you know what? After they encounter it for the first time, then they realize, my God, it's so helpful to have all this stuff written down as I start to lose my memory, that I've got it all there. So yeah, William, you're right. This is the new frontier. Making websites accessible. Everything that's on the internet now is so far from accessible. But it really is achievable, but you have people who don't necessarily want to be the one to have to achieve it themselves.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I see there's some other questions in the Q&A. And some of them are asking about help that was received during the application, and how do you make sure the university you're going to is supporting that kind of diversity and inclusion. So for me, I mean, I was pretty fortunate because when I came to the UK, and I assume, you can correct me, William and Leslie, if it's different, but before I even did my application, I contacted the university that I was considering selecting to apply to, and got in touch with them about, not just the application itself, what they were looking for, but also things like, where would I get accessible housing? What kind of accommodations could I expect? Here's some of the things I thought I would need. So that was all really helpful to me. And also, I think if you can talk to anyone who's actually been to that university, it would be very helpful. So you know what their experience was like, getting adjustments, accommodations, anything else. So yeah, I think that's some of the things that really helped me. I don't know if your experiences were different going to the US, especially William, as far as how you prepared for all of that. But that was some of the ways that I tried to kind of prepare ahead of time.
So I've noticed, I don't know, Leslie might be able to say more about the actual language itself, but from what I've noticed, when you're asking for accommodations in the US, you can ask for them, but nothing that fundamentally changes the structure of the course. At least that's how they word it in Berkeley. So again, with the, say, PowerPoints things, you have a lot of faculty who argue, and somewhat successfully, that this changes the structure of my course. And this gets a lot harder when you go into grad school. So at Berkeley, the two main accommodations given out are extra time for exams, and then exams done in a low distraction environment. So typically kind of a room on your own or with other disabled students. But when you go to grad school, at least in my program, we don't have exams. We have essays we've got to submit maybe the end of the semester. And because of that, I mean, there's an end date when the semester's grades have to be in, but apart from that, you can't really ask for any extra time. So that means for a lot of grad students, actually, feasibly, they can't ask for any accommodations because none apply to them. None apply to their studies. Or if they do apply for the studies, they'd fundamentally alter, say, a graduate seminar, which is usually only spoken and not written down. So you see a tension there with a lot of students saying, hang on a minute, I've got this disability, but when I scroll down for the accommodations list, none of them apply for my course. Or I can't reasonably expect for none of them to apply. So there's an area of like contestation there. And then I think for me, applying for these things, so I noticed one question about the actual application itself. I am like severely dyslexic and dyspraxic. So even if I keep, say, proofreading my statement of purpose and personal statement, I know that some spelling mistakes and grammatical issues are going to get through. And I was kind of very worried about that. But both in the personal statement and in all of the, I mean, it's optional, of course, and then in all of the questionnaires, I did disclose my disability. And I did say during an interview, by the way, if there are spelling mistakes or grammar, I apologize, but it doesn't reflect kind of who I am or my capabilities. And I think for Fulbright very much do get that, and US universities do. The only thing I'd ask people to be aware of is that many US universities, the application pool is not divided, but there's two stages. One is department specific, one is usually graduate division. So you may have disclosed your ability to your department or vice versa, graduate division, and either one of them might not know. So although you may have told them, in a separate email or something, by the way, I'm dyslexic, dyspraxic, expect these issues, the actual second layer or second team of the people reviewing your application might not see that. So I'd ask people to be very aware when they make their application. Is it going to be viewed by both, say, graduate division and a committee and your department? And if so, do you feel comfortable disclosing your disability with both? Obviously, you don't have to do either. But in the case of, say, dyslexia, dyspraxia, I find it helpful to say, actually, it's not carelessness, it's X reason.
As someone who also is dyspraxic, have you encountered, so I mean, you touched on it a little bit where like one of the few things that we're often told for support is like, have you thought about using a computer during your exams? And it's like, yeah, but there's more to this than that. One of the other common pieces of advice that we're giving is recording lectures and seminars. Do you run into any issues with that in terms of like, actually it's intellectual property and you can't record it, or what support have you been able to find for some of these perhaps lesser or are not necessarily as easy to get those accommodations into a course?
So at Berkeley, well, at California, it's a consent ask request to record. So before you record someone, you're meant to say, I am recording this, and they're meant to basically say yes. But the way that UC Berkeley interprets the law is if you've got an accommodation to record in class or seminar, that's flat. You don't necessarily have to ask the professor or the students because it's written down to your accommodation request. But that's a real area of contested concern, because you have some professors say, no, I want to be asked individual. It's a consent state, even though they may not actually read the accommodation letter sent from the office that states that. So it is iffy. So my general, I mean, it's not part of the law, but I think it's what a lot of students here do, is they record their lectures, because it's just usually only professor talking. And then if there's a closed seminar, or say 3 or 4 students on the speaking, sometimes they'll let them know, by the way, I'm recording this, but only I have access to it. And that can be really important to say in closed seminar environments. But if you have legally the accommodation for it, technically we don't, at least in Berkeley, you wouldn't have to send anyone. But it is especially if you have a controversial subject or you're dealing with some people may not want to be recorded. So it is about respecting everyone in the room, where if you do have the right to record, never show it to anyone or really, bring it up. Because the worst thing you do, you want to say, oh, I'm recording you, so you can't say, X or Y about a certain issue.
Leslie, we've got a specific question about the LLM at Indiana.
I wrote back to our student, but what I can share is the typical path, and William, you can tell us if this is what you did at Berkeley, but the typical path would be make yourself known to the Disability Services Office, sort of do their intake, do it as early as possible. And then you yourself or that office will make you and your needs known to the individual department. Now, but sometimes, there is also the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA, in the United States. So much information. I mean, of course, there's the GDPR as well. It's same type of thing, but GDPR covers more. But so much personal information cannot be shared. So it may be that a student winds up at the law school and I'm in my program and I may not know they have disability accommodations because I'm not their professor. So to the extent that you feel comfortable, I would advocate bringing in, the more people you bring in, the better, if that's something that's comfortable for you. The other thing, and I think about what William was saying, is many disability coordinators in individual departments, you might be their first person with, insert the name of the disability. So obviously, you know better than anyone what can help you. And at least here, I find that people are very open. They feel a certain amount of pressure if they're required to figure out what's best for you. So let them skip that step and you tell them what's best for you, and they will tell you whether that's within the scope of, sort of technical possibility. And if not, there might be some give and take. But I noticed this with my son who has ADHD and he's in high school. And so really it's helpful to come in and say, here's what works for him. Can you make this happen? Rather than, what do you suggest?
I completely agree with that. And there are times when the comfort level of disclosing something can be a real issue. So like from my personal experience, for instance, if you're part of the autism, if you have like autism or Asperger's, it can be sometimes it can be important to disclose that in interviews. You know, you may ask me certain questions and get different responses and think, oh, they're a bit, strange, or they're answering it differently. So that's might be what is useful. But of course, even though you have the right not to be discriminated against, many people, and rightly so, would feel, it's a very personal thing to say someone when you kind of first meet them. And in Fulbright, I could really get the, you think about, you got a high profile panel interview with high profile people. In my interview, I had Angelina, who's my specific award. I had, I think, the head of medicine at Oxford or Cambridge, the Chancellor of Cardiff University, and another high profile, someone from and the Maria, who's one of the heads of Fulbright. So it's very high profile. So you can imagine kind of reading the people be there going, oh my goodness, I've got to kind of perform here. Then if you say autistic and you think, oh, eye contact, or oh, I might answer questions differently. There can be an anxiety there where you're thinking, oh my God, what am I going to have to do? And although it's completely up to you, and no one can take this rights away from you, in terms of Fulbright, I guess hand on heart, I personally think it's best to disclose from the beginning. And don't be afraid as you're being interviewed to even, remind people of this. Or if you have ADHD, remind people that you could be, my friend just taps their leg constantly. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not disrespectful. It's because this is how I deal with agitation. At US universities, it can be a bit more tricky. So in grad school, particularly professional and academic non-professional programs, you work with mainly one faculty. They're your advisor. And so usually not in interviews, they're thinking, oh, will I get along with this person? It's a bit kind of like an Oxford or Cambridge interview that way. Will I get along with that person? That's the main thing they're thinking. So within that, I think you've got to think very carefully about the types of programs you want to go for. So you've got to research your university, research your advisors, and really think, is this someone I actually want to work with? And you can even ask the harder question, is there someone I feel comfortable disclosing my disability to? Well, of course, you don't have to, but it can be very, very helpful for your advisor and for yourself if from the very beginning. And Leslie completely right, and Jason's right. At US universities, because they're usually so bureaucratic, especially the public ones, it's best to disclose it as quickly as possible, because you do have to fight for yourself. And then the UK universities, my experience has been the resources haven't been there. So you may be fighting for it and your advice maybe, I completely agree with you, but like the money isn't there and whatnot. And it's kind of, it's basically rationed to an extent. In the universities, the resources usually isn't the question. It's usually just, oh, you got to fill out this paperwork and this paperwork and this paperwork, or this form and this form and this form. So I prepare people to fill in more paperwork than you've ever done in your life. But the ongoing things I think Fulbright and Berkeley need to be better prepared for is the adjacent things. So for instance, you'd have to fill out a tax report when you're here. US citizens have to fill out their taxes, which I never realized. And if you can imagine, I use a screen reader and all of a sudden I'm trying to read the US tax code to fill out how to fill my form, is nearly impossible. And there's particular laws, I'm not sure if it's federal or in California, but professors and university can't answer questions about the tax code or tax. At least that's how they do it in Berkeley. So you're there thinking, can I get help? And they're like, we can't help you. And then you're thinking, oh no, what? And so I think if I was to give any direction to Fulbright University, it's think more about the things adjacent to university. So of course, tax isn't part of your graduate study, but you're gonna have to fill it out every year. So
come to our volunteer income tax clinic. We'll help you out, William.
Yeah,
exactly.
So as we reach the end of our hour, we talked a lot about sort of navigating different challenges and the ways to reach out to people to talk about getting the right accommodations for those challenges. it's a lot of work, but would you all maybe give 30 seconds each to talk about this? Would you still say the experience of doing your Fulbright studying abroad is worth it despite these challenges that you've spoken about today? And I guess we'll start with Jason, then William, and then Leslie to finish us up.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, you know, I came over, I didn't say this in the beginning, but I'd worked for the civil service for about 10 years and kind of, you know, was working at Social Security, worked at Department of Labor in DC. It was great. Came over, did the award here, and really liked it so much and liked my colleagues so much. I stayed and did my PhD. And, you know, like I've kind of, I don't want to say stumbled into it because that doesn't sound right, but, you know, now I'm kind of in this field where I'm running my own company, doing research about disability and other things. I'll admit I originally had plans to go back into academia, but seeing the, how can we say, the actions taken recently on both sides of the pond to teachers and academics who have disabilities and what they're requiring them to do during COVID, it's not going to happen. So, but no, absolutely. I mean, so for me, I tell people all the time, if you watch me on anything else for Fulbright, I'll say it again, absolutely life-changing for me. Completely in a different place than where I was, 5-6 years ago, and completely thrilled with it and had a great time doing it. So yeah, short answer, yes.
Completely. I think you need to, I'm trying to think, it's coming from the UK to the US, it's a whole thing, especially Berkeley, California. I think it has been life-changing, and what I've noticed is many of the political trends and language, now I study politics, many of the political trends and language happen in usually Berkeley, California, and then transfer over. So I remember hearing about pronouns but with emails, and how that became a thing later on in that, or certain things about kind of racial equality, or certain language about like allyship started here, and I've noticed there. So if you're interested in, say, politics, this will be absolutely life-changing, and it will change the way you think about politics for the rest of your life. In terms of things like understanding inequality, understanding climate change, UK universities can't compete. Big public institutions in the US, I think public universities are probably one of the best things about America in terms of the resources they have, the status they have, the respect they have. And so I'd really encourage people not only to do a Fulbright, but if they can, think about public universities, or at least think about private universities with a public ethos. So think about that. Think about, what is their acceptance rate? What is their sense in the community? And this is something you can really do to call your universities out if you want to. A lot of the times they'll have like diversity and equity pages. There was a study done recently where they found that, I think it was like something like 8 out of 10 universities didn't include the word disability or disability at all within their diversity inclusion. So it was really hard. And Berkeley was one of those that's had to change even after Ed Roberts. So if you get into the program and you feel secured, one of the things you can do is, if you go on your university's diversity and equity page and disability isn't there, then maybe that can be your role in study abroad. Maybe your role can be actually making sure that people recognize disability, diversity inclusion includes disabled people. So yeah, it's life-changing, and I think go for it.
Yeah, Leslie, if you could talk a little bit about cultural exchange and study abroad and things like that as well. And
yeah, so absolutely, I'd recommend, I agree with William about the large public universities. Something that William said about the UK situation, where it's like it's rationed, sort of reminded me of the National Health Service, which I have great respect for on the one hand. On the other hand, if you're at the short end of the stick, it. I think that's the difference with the power of the ADA and its antecedent laws, is that you as the student are never going to be told there's not money for that. Now, there might be big debates at the university about who's going to pay for what for you, but you're not going to be told, because it is a federal civil rights law that you lose out. That being said, doesn't mean you're not going to have to advocate for yourself. And so, you know, the one thing I've learned in navigating the world with a wheelchair for the past 15 years is do not assume that anybody knows what it means to have your disability or what you might need. And so, and also at the same token, don't be offended that they don't understand. You know, we may not like it, but it does wind up being our job to educate the world. You know, it might not be a mantle you want, but I would say embrace it, and you will be rewarded by the way that other people come along with you, in large part because it's your civil right, and whether you're born here or not.
Great. I think that's a really, really nice note to end on. Leslie, thank you so much, all of you, for joining me today. It's been sort of really interesting panel, and I hope people have learned a lot and feel more confident making their applications because of that. We are going to take a quick break, no more than a minute or two, to get ready for our next session. We'll be joined by Sasha Daniels from Fulbright Noir, so stick around for that if you are interested. But once again, just like to extend a huge thank you for all three of our speakers for joining us today, and I hope you all have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you each at different times in the near future. So thank you so much.